Hello, welcome. This is NIEM training. I'm Tom Carlson, and I'll be your trainer for the NIEM training. I work at the Georgia Tech Research Institute, GTRI, under the direction of the NIEM Management Office, where I do a lot of the technical support for NIEM, including, ta-da, the training. So sit back. We are going to learn all about NIEM. It's rather lengthy, but you can pause at your leisure, watch at your own speed, learn at your own speed. Contact information will be in the materials. So if you need to contact me with questions, really at any time, feel free to do so. I am a NIEM expert, and I do got NIEM. So please send questions, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of this training. Oh, welcome to NIEM training. As you can see under purpose there, this is a technical webinar focused on developers and implementers who are interested in a deep dive of the National Information Exchange Model, otherwise known as NIEM. I'm Tom Carlson, and I'll be your instructor for the entirety of the training. I work at GTRI, and we work under the NIEM Management Office to provide technical support to NIEM, including training. My email address is right there. If you want to contact me with questions after you watch all of this material, you're welcome to do so. You don't have to go through any hoops. There's nobody you have to go through to talk to me. You can just go ahead and email me at that address, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have from now on until eternity. So please feel free to ask me questions via email if you need more help. If I don't know the answer, I guarantee I know the person who does know the answer, and I can get you to the right people. There's an introduction. We just talked about the purpose. So this is a technical webinar. Again, it's very technical. It involves a lot of XML and XML schema. It involves a smaller amount of JSON. If you're not familiar with XML and XML schema, I am going to talk about it very quickly in a nutshell before we get deep into the really technical materials. But you would do well to go and find some material specifically about XML and XML schema before continuing in the course. It'll make it easier for you down the line, but you don't have to do that. We'll bring you along as we go. But if you find yourself having trouble with the XML, that might be the time to pause these materials and go find some other XML and XML schema materials specifically to get you up to speed on technologies that basically support NIEM, that NIEM is built upon. Everything you're going to see here is all in our NIEM training GitHub repository on github.com. The link is right there. There are links to the big documents, the important things in the bullet list there. And at the end of all these materials, there's a whole resource section that will repeat this information. So don't stress about it now, but it's important you know these things are all out here. Everything you're going to see, every graphic, every XML example, everything we see, every spreadsheet we look at, every XML document we look at are all on the GitHub repo, so you can go there to look at them either during training, if you want to go back and review without rewinding, or after training, or whenever. But all the materials are there. The Master NIEM training document is all right here, and it's the same material. It's exactly the same material. Everything's extensively hyperlinked. You want to know that it's there. It's there for you. It's there for you to be able to find this information whenever you might need it. Okay, so all these materials are there. These are all hyperlinked. If you go to that Master NIEM training document, you'll find links to any of these other materials. There's a syllabus, which is the same information, just in a syllabus form. There are mapping spreadsheets. Now, you don't know what mapping spreadsheets are yet, but you'll find out when we get to that topic. And we will, as we work through the materials, we'll have a number of different mapping spreadsheets showing our progress. Those are all available. They're available in Excel. They're available as PDFs. They're available in numbers if you're on a Mac, in all three formats as we go. There's also what I call an erzat textual instance, and these are text documents that represent the structure of our exchange. I find them handy and helpful, and we'll learn more about those. So you don't know what these all are yet, but you will as we go, and now you know that they're all available to you to look at off of the GitHub repo. GitHub repo gets updated frequently as we make changes to the materials and improvements to the materials. Those improvements show up online. Exact same materials that you see in the training. So a very, very good resource to have. There is also a sample message specification that we use. As part of this training, what we're going to do is we're going to try to learn concepts in the context that they're used. So instead of me giving you essentially a reference manual to read through, we're going to work our way through creating a message specification. And as we do so, we're going to learn all the different technical details of NIEM, how NIEM works. That sample message specification is also available on the GitHub repo, so you can go and play with it yourself, see the different pieces, and see how they're put together. Now the agenda for the training. We've already started it. We're going to go into logistics in just a minute. Then we're going to have a fairly lengthy introduction to NIEM. It doesn't make much sense to talk about how to define a specification in NIEM without an introduction to what NIEM is. But then we're going to get into what is really the meat of the training, an introduction to message specs and IPD development. We're going to go through all the different steps in that, and they're all listed right here. I could go through them, but you don't know what they are yet. We're going to do each one in detail. When we get to mapping, mapping is the big one. Mapping is where we are going to go through our business requirements and search and find them in NIEM and figure out how to represent our business needs as a NIEM exchange. And that will require learning all sorts of things about NIEM as well as learning several tools. By the time we get down to the end, we'll have some exercises. If you care to look at exercises, you don't have to, totally optional, but there are exercises, there are solutions to them as well, if you like to do those sort of things. And then finally, there's a research section at the very end, which will have links to all the pertinent materials that you'll ever really need if you're going to be doing NIEM work. So let's jump right in to logistics and background. So this training program is a major revamp of prior training programs. NIEM training has been a thing for quite a while, over 15 years. And it's been revamped, and this is the latest revamp. The major thing here is basically building the training around actually building a message specification and doing it online. So it's a major revamp of prior training programs. If you took NIEM training years ago, this is very different, very, very different. Normally when we do this live, it's 3 days, 4 hours each day, 1 to 5 p.m. Of course, you're not looking at this live, although you may be watching it during these time periods. You're not doing it live, but you should know that this thing is usually a 3-day training, 4 hours a day for 3 solid days, where we take a short break on the hour. You know, that's actually a pretty good idea if you're watching it as well. Take a break on the hour. Don't just sit and watch this for hours after hours after hours. We also usually have questions via chat. And I encourage people to ask their questions when they have them, not to hold them till the end of a section, or even worse, to the end of a day. Now, depending on how you're watching these materials, you may have that option. Now, you may be just watching these materials as materials, and if you have questions, you'll have to email me, and I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you as quick as I can, but still, that may not be instantaneous. But you may be watching this as part of a hybrid training, in which case you are watching it at the same time as a number of other people via some sort of online service, and at the same time there's a chat window. And if you're doing this sort of hybrid chat, and if you're doing it, you'll know because we will publicize it as such, that will mean that me or somebody like me will be monitoring the chat throughout. So while you're not listening to me live, I am sitting there ready to answer questions. So if you are in a hybrid situation where you are watching these videos during a set time, probably on something like Microsoft Teams, you can ask questions in chat and get them answered right away. And again, especially since nobody is talking live to you in that situation, the person monitoring chat really can answer your questions right away. So don't hold questions if you're in that hybrid situation. If you can ask questions, ask them when you have them, because that's when you need them answered. You need them answered then. So that's what we're going to do. So now that we've dealt with logistics, we're going to get into an introduction to NIEM. We're just going to talk a little bit about it. You're going to learn how it kind of works at a governance level, at a high level, learn what it is, things like that. So easy stuff to begin with is here's our introduction to NIEM. Let's talk about an introduction to NIEM. We're going to talk about what NIEM is. We're going to talk about the scope of NIEM, and I've got several diagrams to explain the scope of NIEM, and hopefully one will resonate with you. Maybe none of them will, but hopefully one will. And then we'll talk a little bit about NIEM harmonization and organization, how NIEM is put together and how it all kind of works and gets governed. So what is NIEM? Well, NIEM itself is a framework. It's a National Information Exchange model, but it's more than just a model. It's a framework for building message specifications using NIEM as a framework. So NIEM is community-driven, government and jurisdiction-wide, standards-based approach to exchanging information. It's got a community around it. It's not just government stuff. There's a community. It's not stuck to any particular government branch. It's not stuck to any particular government level. It's just a widespread thing for building standards so you can exchange information. Different communities can collectively leverage NIEM to increase their efficiencies and improve decision making. And I'm going to try to highlight that, but not long click on it. I'm going to try to highlight that because this is really important. Whenever you see efficiencies and improved decision making, what that means is by making information sharing easier. And that's always the underlying thing. NIEM increases efficiencies by making information exchange easier. NIEM improves decision making by making information exchange easier. So that's what's underlying all this. The whole idea is let's make exchanging information easier. NIEM is available to everyone. Public, private, doesn't matter. You don't need anybody's permission to use NIEM. All you have to do is go to the website, download it, and you can use NIEM today. You don't have to get permission. You don't have to talk to the federal government. You don't have to talk to local government. You don't have to talk to state government. You can be a private organization. You can be industry. You can be education. Doesn't matter. Everybody can use NIEM. It's available to everyone. NIEM is a data model, but it also includes governance, training. You're watching the training right now. Tools. We're going to demo several tools during the course of the training. Technical support services. You can send questions to contact. There's a contact us page, as well as emailing me. And an active community to help you use NIEM in adopting a standards-based approach to exchanging data. That will increase efficiencies and improve decision making. It really breaks down the framework into three sections. So you see here on the left, you got NIEM community with a formal governance process, online repositories, which are in a shaky state right now, where we have some old ones that are being sunsetted, and we've got new up and coming ones. So right now we're in a flux in between. By the time you watch this training, the online repositories may be more robust, but they're under development and they'll be coming soon. We have mission-oriented domains where content in NIEM is organized among domains to meet the needs of those domains. We have self-managing domain stewards. We have committees and people who manage each domain. So it's not like just some centralized federal thing governing the whole NIEM. Rather, there are domain experts that are stewarding different mission-oriented domains. In the center, you have the technical framework, and that is the data model itself, which we are going to learn about in detail through the course of the training. There are XML design rules for how to use that data model. There's a development methodology that we're going to follow to build a message specification. And then there are predefined deliverables, IEPD. Now, IEPD is the older name for message specification. We're in the middle of changing that terminology over. Nobody likes IEPD. It's just hard to say. A message specification makes a lot more sense. It stands for Information Exchange Package Documentation, but it's changing to message specification. But it's still got the old term on the slide. It's because it's short and it fits. And then on the right, we have support framework. So there are tools for development and discovery. We're going to learn about those tools. We're going to see demos of those tools as we go. There's an established training program, which we're watching right now. There's implementation support. Again, you can contact me. There's a contact us page on the NIEM.gov site where you can get more information, you can get help. Along those same lines, there's a help desk and a knowledge center. So these are people who are basically on call to answer questions. You email them the questions, and if they can answer them, they'll answer them. If they can't, then they will send them on to somebody who can. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's somebody like me. It just depends on the question. So it's a whole world, it's a whole framework that all is around helping you use NIEM and helping you better exchange information. So what's the whole deal then? Why do we want this NIEM stuff? Well, because we have an interop problem. If you've got two entities and they don't have the same understanding of their data, then when they actually go to exchange the data, that's not going to work because the people on the left may have a different idea of what they're sending to the people on the right, and the people on the right don't understand the information they're getting. You can't really exchange data for real if you don't have the same understanding of what that data is. And so what NIEM is about is providing a common language, a common glossary, if you will, for different terms in the real world to describe real world objects that get exchanged so that everybody can implement towards the same terminology so that we all have the same understanding of what those things mean. So what is NIEM and what is it not? So NIEM is a common vocabulary. It's that common language that we're all going to map to in different ways, and we're going to see how. That's the whole point of the training, is to show you how. But it's a means of enabling efficient information exchanges among diverse public and private organizations, which then help with decision making, help make things more efficient. NIEM is a few things NIEM is not. And NIEM is not a system or a database. It's not a database. Don't make your database look like NIEM. Don't do it, because NIEM is not designed as a database. It's also not a system. There isn't a NIEM system that you push your data in and other people pull it out. NIEM is just a framework for defining exchanges, and the systems that actually do the exchanges are outside the scope of NIEM. Future topic. We're going to get to it very, very soon. So here's the basic idea. See, we've got these three organizations on the left, and they've all got concepts that they know about. They all know about last names, they all know about social security numbers, and they all have a concept of nationality. But they can all have different terms for these concepts. Organization A may call your last name. Organization B calls it a surname. Organization C calls it a family name. So how do we know they're all talking about the same thing? Same for social security number. Some call it a social security number. Some places call it an SSID. Some people call it a SOCH. The organization C is a little more informal. They just call it a SOCH. And same for nationality or citizenship. Are you calling it nationality or are you calling it citizenship? So what NIEM gives you is a common vocabulary so that everybody calls it the same thing when they're exchanging information. Not in their internal systems. Organization A wants to call a last name, fine. But when they're exchanging that information, or the organization B and C, they're going to call it a person's surname. That's the term from NIEM. And when organization B is going to send social security number information, they can still call it an SSID internally, but when they're sending it to organizations A and C, they're going to call it a person SSN identification, because that's the name in NIEM, that's the name in the NIEM glossary. And the same for nationality. We're just going to call it person nationality while we're exchanging the information. And then if another organization comes along, organization, say D over on the right, well, they don't have to learn everybody's terminology. They don't have to learn that organization A calls it a last name. They don't need to know that organization B calls that a surname and organization C calls it a family name. They just know that it's going to be called a person's surname while it's being exchanged. And whatever they call it internally is fine with them. But while we exchange the information, we're going to use the same terminology. And that's the whole idea with NIEM. Let's all agree on a common vocabulary, and while we are exchanging information, let's all speak the same language so we all know we're talking about the same things. So here's just a quick simplified, some diagrams to show. Now I have to be honest, where it says without NIEM and with NIEM, you could put any standard in there. This is really more of a standards thing. But on the left, you've got without NIEM, without any sort of standard. You have a mess of peer-to-peer agreements to share information, and everyone gets defined separately. And every one of these little entities, each little car, each little box on here, has to go and make peer-level agreements with everybody else to determine how they're going to share information. And if you get enough organizations involved, it's utter chaos. And then when somebody new comes along, say the fire truck on the lower left just came into the picture, they have to learn how to talk to each and every different little individual in that diagram. Whereas on the right, you've got with standards, and hopefully a standard built with NIEM, but this is true of any standard. Now everybody talks to the same standard. They don't have to have peer-to-peer agreements and understandings with everybody else. They all work towards the same standard. You know, that's why your web browser works, right? Because everybody who makes a web browser agrees to the same standards. Everybody who makes a server agrees to the same standards, and you can use any web browser with any back-end server and still get a web page and read it because there are standards in place. And it's the same thing here. With NIEM, you've got a standard that gets defined using NIEM. That's the IPD or message specification. And that then in turn simplifies the information exchange between the different entities. Just a lot cleaner. And it's not a foreign concept. We do this all the time, but we don't do it on a wide scale in government, and that's what NIEM is about. So let's talk about the scope of NIEM. Let's not get beyond what NIEM is about. NIEM is a data layer standard. It intentionally does not address all the technologies needed for information sharing. It's just about payload documents and not about anything more than that. Exchange partners decide how to store and process their own data. So you see here in this diagram, and there's I think 4 diagrams here, and you can pick the one you like best. This diagram shows 2 systems, one on the left, one on the right. They both have tools for taking data from their system and turning it into a NIEM conformant exchange. And then in the middle, the data, while it's being exchanged, is NIEM. That's the scope of NIEM. Outside of that, that's not NIEM. NIEM doesn't care how the system on the left got the stuff out of their data store and massaged it into NIEM format. And over on the right, NIEM doesn't care how they took that NIEM data and took it apart and put it into their own internal system. NIEM is just about the format of the payload document, the format of the information while it's being exchanged, and that's all NIEM is about. But if you don't like that, here's the second diagram. So in this one, we've got NIEM, the package, the actual payload document, as a white box in the center. But it's surrounded by a message envelope, and then there are processes involved in finding the message and sending it to the right place. There's metadata descriptions about the message. There's base technologies like XML and XML schema wrapped all around that. There's management on one side, there's security on the other, there's an API specifying it all, and there's communication protocols at the bottom, and then it all works together to send the information around. But all NIEM cares about is a white box in the center. All NIEM cares about is the format of the data while it's being exchanged. That's all NIEM cares about. But if you don't like that, we have the OSI model, Open Source Interconnection Model. And OSI has 7 layers, and they start very, very low level, physical stuff like cabling, all the way up to the end user, what an end user sees. And NIEM is presentation layer. It's layer 6 in the OSI model. Now, if you don't know about OSI models and you don't care, that's okay. There'll be more diagrams. But if you like OSI, yeah, it's level 6. Level 6 is a presentation layer. Now, it's important. This is presentation to another system, not presentation to a person. Presentation to a user is application. That's layer 7. This is presentation to a system. This is the syntax layer. This is where you have things like ASCII, text. You have just plain old text. Basically it's the data layer. But if this is too busy of a diagram, that's okay. We have a simplified version as well. So open source interconnection, OSI model, same 7 layers, starts very, very low level. Physical at layer 1, this is actual cabling, things like that. And you work your way up in terms of higher and higher levels of abstraction, if you will. And you get to layer 6, the presentation layer. That's the syntax layer. It's a translator. It's the text layer. It's the layer where the data actually is. And then layer 7 is the actual user, the user application layer. So presentation means presenting to systems, not to users. NIEM translates data between systems, provides a common vocabulary. NIEM uses text-based formats like XML, JSON, and RDF, and these are ASCII or UTF-8. That's exactly what layer 6 is all about. You can also use compression and encryption. Those are things that can be used on layer 6, but they're not part of NIEM. NIEM is just about the payload document. If you need to compress it or you need to encrypt it, that's cool, but that's not NIEM's scope. That's outside the scope of NIEM. Okay, so if you didn't like any of those diagrams, right, you didn't like any of them, they didn't work for you, let's try this analogy. Let's try a bottle. So this is a bottle. It's currently empty, but it could be filled with liquid. The liquid in the bottle, that's NIEM. The makeup of that liquid, the recipe for what's in that, right? Is it water in here? Is it vodka and orange juice? Is it a gimlet? I think that's vodka and lime juice. I don't drink, so I don't know really. Is it a latte? Whatever. That's NIEM. The recipe of what's in the bottle is NIEM. There's a whole lot else about the bottle, right? There is the shape of the bottle. Okay. NIEM doesn't care about the shape of the bottle. Shape of the bottle doesn't matter. NIEM doesn't care. It's made out of something. It's made out of a material and it was built in a certain way. NIEM doesn't care what it's made out of or how it was built. It could be clear or it could be opaque. This one's opaque. I put stuff in it. You can't see it. That's kind of like encryption. NIEM doesn't care whether or not you encrypt your stuff, whether you encrypt your exchange. NIEM is just about what's in the bottle. NIEM doesn't care the shape of the bottle. Doesn't care whether you can see into the bottle. I can move this bottle around in different ways. Right? I can put it in a box and mail it to someone. I can throw it at someone. I can do a lot of different things. Roll it across the floor, put it in a car and drive it somewhere. Those are all like transport protocols, and NIEM doesn't care. NIEM doesn't care how the bottle moves around. Doesn't care what shape it is. Doesn't care what it's made out of. I've got different ways to fill the bottle. I could fill it with a funnel, or I could just be really careful. I could stick a hose in it. NIEM doesn't care. That's like building your exchange from your internal data source. NIEM doesn't care how you build it. NIEM just cares what's inside the bottle. And similarly, I'm going to pour the liquid out at some point to do something with it. That's like taking the exchange, taking the pieces out and putting it in your data store. NIEM doesn't care how you do that either. NIEM just cares about what's inside the bottle. And that's the scope of NIEM. So that gets us to NIEM harmonization and organization. So you can kind of think of NIEM as a data model. NIEM as a data model, as a mature and stable data dictionary. Now, I'm really not a fan of the term data dictionary, but I don't have a better term. Glossary is along the same lines. I don't want you to get the idea that NIEM is a flat data dictionary of terms and definitions. There are tons of terms and definitions in NIEM, around 13,000 of them, but it's not a flat data dictionary. They're structured and put together in different ways. So it's more than just agreed upon terms and definitions. It's also relationships between those terms and formats of how different things are represented. Data formats, which things are strings, which things are numbers, and what kind of numbers. How do different things fit inside of each other, the whole structure part of it. And NIEM is all of that together. Now, NIEM consists of two closely related vocabularies. One is NIEM core. So let me scroll down just a little bit so you can see more of the diagram. NIEM core is the generic stuff. It's the stuff that everybody exchanges. It's really generic things. People, places, locations, organizations, dates, activities. Generic concepts like that everybody understands. So those aren't specific to any domain. So they get put together into a NIEM core. We call it NIEM core. And it's stuff everybody exchanges, everybody knows about. And surrounding NIEM core are a variety of domains. So the different domains have data that is specific to that particular domain. So there's a justice domain. And the justice domain is filled up with things that are all about justice, filled up with justice-oriented chunks of information, so that if you're doing justice exchanges, or even something just tangentially related to justice exchanges, that's where you're going to find justice-specific information. There's an emergency management one. There's an intelligence one. There's a whole bunch of them. What are they? Well, we're going to see in just a sec. As we scroll down a little more, you can also tell that diagram over here. It's got several layers, and those layers are labeled. I know you can't read them because they're very, very small, but it's federal, state, local, tribal, industry, and international. And the idea there is that these different layers underscore that NIEM is not just a federal thing. NIEM is not a U.S. federal government standard-making thing. NIEM is usable at the federal level, sure, but it's also usable at state and local level, tribal levels. Industry uses it, and NIEM is spreading internationally as well. So it's not just it's right now it's federally funded, sure, but it's not a federal program. It's really not. It's a community that crosses all these levels of government, and NIEM's beginning was not at a federal level. NIEM's beginning was as a grassroots effort at a state level, which then built up, and the federal level adopted it. So NIEM is not just a federal type thing. No matter where you are in government or even outside of government, NIEM can be for you. It's not just for big federal agencies to use. Now, what kind of things go in NIEM core? Well, here's the challenge with NIEM. There's 13,000 things in it. I can't lead you through all 13,000 things. That would take forever. I just can't do it. But I can provide you with some word clouds that give you an idea of the kind of things. Now, to actually get deep into the NIEM and what NIEM holds, that's what search and discovery tools are for. And we will see those and learn how to use those. But for right now, we're just going to look at some word clouds. And you'll see generic type things: documents, organizations, names, items, locations, person, common kind of concepts. But then here are our domains. So right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different domains, and 2 that are up and coming. So you see you got agriculture, biometrics. There's a cyber domain that just was new in 5.1, so that's brand new. I mentioned justice, it's there. You see emergency management. And then over on the right column is upcoming domains. We got learning and development domain. This is a Department of Defense run thing, and this is all about learning and development. And then we also have international human services. In international human services is a different spin on human services. Whereas a lot of U.S. human services is really about families, TANF, things like that. International human services is more about pensions, national pensions, things like that. So it's a different spin, kind of a different concept. And those domains are both in the works right now, and you'll be seeing them. They may be domains by the time you watch this video, but they're coming along, and there'll be new domains soon. So what kind of things can we find in these domains? Well, luckily, I have word clouds for those. So agriculture, things like acreage, that makes sense. Geospatial, yeah, that makes sense. Crops, locations, points, dates, coordinates, that all makes sense. If you look at some of the smaller stuff, you'll see tracts. Okay, yeah, that's an agriculture thing. Biometrics, hey, images, DNA, fingerprints, capture, biometric. Yeah, biometric-y type stuff are in there. CBRN, you see rad data in big letters, that's scary. But you see analysis and case and devices and instruments and inspections. You see dosage, you see exposure, you see alarm if you look closely enough. And again, that makes sense for that domain. Emergency management has things like resources and notifications and alerts and alarms, locations, events. Human services has, well, the kind of things you might think. You know, wages and employers and pay and cases, data, privacy, things like that. Immigration has alien, immigration, benefits, students, authorizations, dependent programs. Infrastructure protection is a fairly small domain, so there's not a lot there. I think you're seeing probably every term in it. But assets and sectors and stuff, that makes sense for thinking about infrastructure protection. Intelligence, you got persons and identifications and interest and agency, kind of scary, some scary sounding things. International trade, you got consignments, containers, transport, means, goods, that makes sense. Justice has the kind of things you'd think, assessments, parole, subjects, people, hearing, incidents, supervision. Maritime has vessel in huge letters. Well, that makes sense. It's maritime. Military operations, MilOps, has targets and commands and tracks and tasks and events. That sounds all MilOps to me. And screening has people, because you're screening people. So yeah, people, person is going to be large there. Encounters, status, flights, things like that. And then finally, surface transportation, roadway in big letters, traffic, intersections, control, things like that. So what you see in these word clouds is just really a high level, it's a word cloud after all, it's just a high level glimpse at which terms are most often used. But you see they make sense. They are the kind of terms you'd expect to see for these different domains. So we know that there's a core and we know there are domains surrounding it. That tells us enough to be able to talk about NIEM versioning. So NIEM has major and minor versions plus something we call domain updates. So a major version is the big number in front of the dot. So something like 4.2 to 5.0, that's a major version release. Right now, those happen every 3 years. How often major versions come out for NIEM is highly dependent on who is running NIEM at the moment and what their priorities are and how they do things. So prior to the Department of Defense running the NIEM program, DHS ran the program. DHS's philosophy is we will release NIEM releases when they're ready. And so releases would come out on a fairly leisurely schedule when we thought that they were ready, when we thought we had enough new content and we had made the right kind of changes, and we'll release them when they're ready. And so there were NIEM releases, but they would happen less often than every 3 years, shall we say. So you'd have longer stretches between major releases, but you might have more stuff in a major release. The Department of Defense, on the other hand, very disciplined. These things happen every 3 years because DoD says they're going to happen every 3 years. And so far, they've been following that cadence. For a major release, all bets are off. Everything can change in a major release. NIEM Core can and will change. We'll put new things into NIEM Core. We'll change things that are in NIEM Core. The underlying infrastructure can change, which we will do because we're always trying to make each major version better than the one that came before it. Domains can certainly change, and domains get harmonized. By that I mean we look at the domains and we look for content that is repeated in multiple domains and just have it in one place, or that may be in the wrong spot. May have been the right spot at the time or the only spot at the time, but eventually we realize it's not the right spot and it's moved. A lot of things in the human services domain were originally in the justice domain. Why? Because there wasn't a human services domain and the justice domain was the best home of the domains available. But then when you have a human services domain, you go, oh, this content is really more human services oriented. If we ever have a health domain in NIEM, there are plenty of things in justice and in human services domains that will get moved to a health domain. They're not in a health domain now because we simply don't have one, because there's not the interest and we don't have domain stewards to make that domain. But when we do, then we'll move content. And that's what I mean about harmonizing, is moving the content where it should be, because where it is now may have been the best place at the time, but isn't the best place now. And we do that with a combination of tools and human collaboration to reach consensus on where things should go. And of course, we add a lot of new content as well. That is a big deal. When domains get harmonized, we add new content, and we just end up with a bigger model. Because of all these changes, nothing in a major version change is guaranteed to be backwards compatible with earlier major releases. So if you do work in 4.2, say, that is not necessarily going to work in NIEM 5.0. And that's okay. We're going to see when we talk about migration in just a second that that's fine. It doesn't have to. But you just need to know that. You need to know that if you want to move to 5.0, you're probably going to have to make some changes in your work. Now, NIEM 6.0, the next major release, is currently scheduled for the end of 2023 because 5.0 came out in 2020, 3 years later. And it will probably hit that mark or be very, very close to it. My experience has been that DoD keeps you on schedule. So if NIEM 6.0 is scheduled for the end of 2023, NIEM 6.0 is probably going to come out right around the end of 2023. Now, minor releases are a little different. Minor releases are the number after the dot. So for example, 5.0 to 5.1, which is a release that just happened at the end of last year. These happen annually. Again, the cadence for releases is highly dependent on who is running the program. As long as DoD is running the program, you will see minor version releases annually. If somebody else is running the program in the future, that may change. Right now, it's annually. An important thing to understand about minor releases is that the NIEM core does not change, nor does the underlying infrastructure. So these things don't change. The base of NIEM does not change. What does change are the domains. The domains can change. Domains can be harmonized, although we don't put the same level of effort in as we do on a major release. New domains can be added. We did this in 5.1. The cyber domain is a brand new domain, got added in 5.1. It is not there in 5.0. Domains are not guaranteed to be backwards compatible with earlier minor releases. So there's no actual guarantee that if I did work in 5.0 in a domain that it would work just as well in 5.1, but it probably will. They almost always are backwards compatible. It's not guaranteed, but they usually are. So usually anything you did in 5.0 probably works just fine in 5.1. NIEM 5.2 is scheduled for the end of this year, the end of 2022, and I'm very confident that that date will be hit. We're hard at work on it right now. Domain updates are done per domain. So now this is, we did major, we did minor, now we're talking about domain updates. And the idea with domain updates is sometimes a domain has new content they want to get into their domain, but they don't want to wait for the next minor release. They just want to add some content. And as long as you're just adding content, then you're backwards compatible. You're not changing anything that already exists. You're just adding to things. So we let domains do that whenever they want. If they want to add content in a purely additive form that won't break any compatibility, then they can go ahead and do that. And domains occasionally do, where they have content they really want to get in, they don't want to wait for a minor release. It's less common now because minor releases come out annually, but when minor releases were coming out every 2, maybe 3 years, then domains had a need to enter content in between minor releases. So you don't see them as much now. Usually things that get added as a domain release get folded into the next minor release and just become part of the model. Old versions never go away. So we've talked all about all this versioning. They never go away. You can still use NIEM 1.0 if you want, and the tools will support it, and the schemas for it are out there, and you can still use it. Please don't do that. NIEM 1.0 was a hybrid of GJXDM, which was a justice model from which NIEM was built, and what it became in NIEM 2.0. NIEM.1 is kind of a mess. Please do not use NIEM.1. But if you really wanted to, you could. You could. And if you ran across a NIEM 1.0 exchange you wanted to modify, the tools would still work with it, including migration tools. So it's you can still use it if you want. NIEM 2.0 was a good version. NIEM 2.0 was a good version of NIEM. For those of you on Macs, NIEM 2.0 was Snow Leopard. For old DOS people, NIEM 2.0 was DOS 5. It's a good version. It's a good, solid version. And there are plenty of NIEM 2.0 exchanges that are still being used out there, and the tools still support it. You don't have to migrate if you don't have to. If you've got something in an older version of NIEM, and it works, that's fine. Just keep it. You don't have to migrate. And that's important. You need to understand that if I do work today, it's not going to get broken in a year when a minor release comes out, or it's not going to get broken at the end of 2023 when NIEM 6 comes out. That's going to be fine. You can still keep using it. You don't have to migrate unless you want to. You don't have to migrate unless you want to. Now you may want to migrate if a new version gives you additional functionality that you need, and especially if you're already making changes. This happens to me a lot where I will be asked to help with migrating a message spec from an older version of NIEM because they needed to add some things to the specification, and while you're already adding new things, that's a good time to go ahead and migrate to a newer version. So yeah, migrate it to a newer version if there's functionality you want, and especially if you're already making changes, that's a really good time for going ahead and migrating to a new version. NIEM provides some tools for doing that, so you're not on your own. You have to do this by hand. The tools will migrate the NIEM stuff. Now we'll find as we go later, part of the process of defining a message specification is creating things of your own, because not everything you need in NIEM is going to be in there, and so you're going to need to make some new things, and we're going to see how you do that. But the migration tools will help you with the NIEM part of it, which is the bulk of the work. And in my experience, and I've done a lot of migrations, it's about 90% effective in migrating older NIEM stuff to new NIEM stuff. It falls down when structure changes. So if things are structured a little differently, you need to reflect that, you need to take that into account. But it's about 90% effective. It works really well, and I have gone from really old NIEM to really new NIEM in a migration, and it works. And it got me to about 90% of the stuff migrated successfully. And I'm talking like NIEM 3 to NIEM 5. Which goes through 2 major versions and several minor versions. Unfortunately, the migration does go release by release. You can't just migrate from NIEM 3 to NIEM 5.1. You have to migrate from 3 to 3.03 to 3.1 to 4.0 to 4.1 to 4.2 to 5.0 to 5.1. So there's a number of different steps. But again, the migration tool makes that very easy. But you're going to have to do some manual work as well for things you've added to the Exchange. Migration tools can't help you with that, but it's relatively easy because the migration tools take care of the bulk of it. Let's talk a little about the organization of NIEM. Let's take a look at its org chart. So here's the org chart for NIEM, and at the top you have the ESC, the Executive Steering Council. So these are representatives from the different agencies that technically support NIEM. Right now that would be DoD, DHS, DOJ, and HHS. So Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services usually skip the meetings. So it's really the big 3 are the ones that are really behind NIEM and push it. And they're on the Executive Steering Council, and they make the high-end decisions and the general direction. Underneath that is the NIEM NMO, the NIEM Management Office with an Executive Director. Over on the right, you will see how DoD structures that right now. The exact structure of how the management office works depends on which agency is running it. So right now DoD is running it. Before them DHS did. Before DHS DOJ did. And so right now this is how DoD does it. So they've got an executive director, managing director, deputies as needed, business managers, technical managers, Stratcom folks, and these are all really sharp folks. I enjoy working with all of them, and I work with them closely. All really sharp folks that make NIEM work on a day-to-day basis. So great folks. And then below the management office, we have 2 committees. So let's talk about the one on the right first. This is the NBAC, the Business Architecture Committee. And these are the folks that deal with the content of NIEM. So they figure out what the elements need to be, what the data pieces are. They're all about the content. It's a couple of co-chairs and approximately 40 members. The NBAC tries to be representational. They try to represent the different domains, get people in from different levels of government, get people in from the different domains. So you get people from different subject matter experts in there. And they have regular meetings where they work through how the content should be in NIEM, what new content needs to be in there, what content needs to change. When it comes to harmonization, that's where the harmonization happens. And then below that, you'll see domain stewards. So different domains have their own stewards for running those particular domains. So there's a committee to run the justice domain. It's called the XSTF, and they work on that domain, and then they pass their recommendations up to the NBAC, and it all works together. It's very decentralized, which may be strange if you're used to federal programs, but it's very decentralized. The domains manage themselves under the umbrella of the NBAC. So that's the business committee. Those are business people, subject matter experts, representation of the different domains. On the left is the NTAC, the Technical Architecture Committee. So this is the committee full of nerds, essentially. I'm on this committee and have been for years. It has two co-chairs, one from government and one from private industry. So that's the breakup there. We want to make sure that we have representation from both. And around a dozen people who are subject matter experts in the technical side of things. So these aren't content people, these are the technical people. These are the people that figure out how NIEM is going to work, how it's going to support the needs that are found by the business committee. So this is a technical committee, doesn't represent domains, rather tries to represent technical expertise. So for example, NIEM is trying to get more and more involved in ontologies. So we recruited some ontology people to be on the NTAC because we didn't have that knowledge in-house. We needed that knowledge in the committee. So we went and we shanghaied a guy. No, we didn't. We just asked him politely and he was happy to join. And that's how the NTAC works. Again, it's a representative body, but it represents technologies rather than subject matter. And you put that all together and you have governance for the NIEM.